I'm Brian Foster, and this is the Grindhouse Institute. On each episode of this podcast, Jeremy Floyd and I program and discuss a double or triple feature movie night. Each of the movies share common themes, and we'll talk about them here. We're happy you could join us for today's film block that we call Paranoia Puppetry. Trust is defined as the firm belief in the reliability, truth, or strength of someone or something. We trust our family, we trust our friends, we may or may not trust authority figures, but we all determine how much we trust those around us. What if those that we trusted turned out to be our enemies, or perhaps master manipulators, human puppeteers? Today's Grindhouse Institute block includes 3 films. 1954's Suddenly, Alfred Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much from 1956, and the 1962 John Frankenheimer classic, The Manchurian Candidate. These movies all presage the Kennedy assassination, but when explored side by side, they expose a paranoia metastasizing in the American psyche as the Cold War both intensified and became less tangible. In the town of Suddenly, nothing could possibly go awry, not since the days of the gold rush at least, yet one day strangers claiming to be federal agents are allowed into an unsuspecting and trusting family's home, a home that offers both great supper as well as a sniping advantage to anyone handy with a long-range rifle. While on a family vacation in Marrakesh, the man who knew too much, Dr. Ben McKenna, befriends a mysterious gentleman who asks a lot of questions without giving many answers. Unless, of course, those answers include a secret plot for assassination. Finally, Bennett Marco and Raymond Shaw, decorated Korean War soldiers and prisoners of war, whose recurring nightmares and strange visions test their trust in their superiors, their families, and even their own memories. Thank you for listening to the Grindhouse Institute. Please enjoy.
Raymond Shaw is the bravest, kindest, warmest, most wonderful human being I've ever known in my life.
All right, and welcome to the show. I'm Brian Foster. With me, as always, Jeremy Floyd. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
We're doing this from a distance, a safe social distance.
Pretty safe.
Jeremy, what movies did you bring for us today?
Yeah, so today we've got Suddenly from 1954, The Man Who Knew Too Much from 1956, and The Manchurian Candidate from 1962. All of these are assassination-based movies that all took place before the JFK assassination. And they all take place in this Cold War context, and it starts off with maybe kind of an optimism of the post-war America.
Golly! The president?
And as it progresses over that, I don't know what is it, 8 years? Like, you can see that sort of optimism erode as the Cold War escalates, and where it ends with the Manchurian Candidate in particular. That was basically 13 months before Dallas.
13 months before JFK was assassinated.
Exactly, and it gets closer and closer to what that event was like. I mean, although I guess I have to say, like, Suddenly was pretty similar to like the
actual shooting.
The window.
This gun's got a heavy recoil. It won't stand still. And we got just 3 seconds to nail the president.
Exactly. From what's the problem? That house up on the hill.
It should be obvious to you that if anybody wanted to kill the president, he could do a beautiful job of it right from this window of yours.
I'm sorry, can you go through the years again? Suddenly was what year?
So that was 54, and The Man Who Knew Too Much was 56, and then Manchurian Candidate was 62.
Oh, wow. Okay, so they were all really bunched together in that time. But interesting to see how much of a different film Manchurian Candidate is to Suddenly. That was like, it looked like it was pushing those more modern editing and shooting techniques. John Frankenheimer directed this. I'm not sure who shot it, but I'm sure it's someone that I don't know because it's from that era that I'm not too familiar with. To be totally frank, I have never seen these films before. They're probably movies that I should have seen, at least to this point. I'm going to be 40 next year. Yeah. So I definitely should have seen them, but I'm, like you said yesterday on that text message, I'm glad I saw them at an older age. I can really, really appreciate them, and they were fantastic, all 3 of them.
Yeah, and I Manchurian Candidate, I feel like is the most famous of the 3. It's definitely, I feel like it's on, a lot of the top 100 lists. And
Also, The Man Who Knew Too Much was is also well known. I mean, it's a Hitch film.
well,
So...
and it was the movie that from which Que Sera Sera, what became a thing. It was made for that movie is what I'm trying to say.
And a great device to bring it back, because
Yeah.
it was. You see a lot of times, especially around that era, those movies when kids would whistle with their fingers, and they would do that, and I was like, oh, here it goes again. And the fact that they brought that back, and then it was fantastic.
The plant was pretty good. They just had her singing around, and and then it was also that people kept recognizing her, but it didn't seem like that was going anywhere because of where the sort of A plot was.
Right.
But they did manage to pull that one together
very well too. Plus, they showcase Doris Day and her amazing singing voice, and just unbelievable. The kids sing, and you're like, it's a kid singing. She goes, you're just like, oh my god. You've got Doris Day. I'm Joe McKenna, who basically figured out the entire plot of the film, or at least the archings of this nefarious plot immediately, within seconds.
Exactly.
One conversation, and she's already in it. She already knows something's up.
Yeah, Jimmy Stewart was definitely not on board. She's just a crazy woman.
Exactly. You're paranoid.
Yeah. And lo and behold, guess what? She was right.
Yeah.
All along. Yeah.
So I see what you were saying with suddenly, especially the start of the optimism you were talking about. You mean optimism post-war, right?
Yeah, exactly. And suddenly I felt like it was a good place to start in the sense that, chronologically it was the first one, and then also it had that very Leave It to Beaver Mayberry opening.
Mm-hmm.
It was that kid was basically Opie, and Sterling Hayden, who wants to become his stepfather or whatever the whole time. The movie starts off in one place and ends up in a completely different place. You know what I mean? And what's funny about it, I feel like that movie in particular, Sterling Hayden was pretty miscast, because when you see him standing next to Sinatra, especially the scrawny 1954 Sinatra, he could have just torn him in half like a phone book. It was just
broken him. I was saying that even when Sterling Hayden, when Sheriff Todd Shaw was walking with the Secret Service who had just shown up to the town of Suddenly, they pull into this wide shot, and he is literally 2 heads taller than every Secret Service agent.
Right? No, he's just like this freak. He's
he was
giant.
huge. I mean, it's really great seeing, because he was in quite a few films. How many times did he play a police officer? I mean, as well as The Godfather.
Yeah,
probably,
that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I think up to this point he'd played a lot of criminals.
Right.
And
The
Asphalt
Killer?
Jungle, I think, was the big one. The Killing came after this. Was like a year or two later.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and then of course he's General Jack D. Ripper, and later on in Dr. Strangelove, and then maybe I don't know what would most people know him from The Godfather, being
that's how I knew him, to be honest.
Cop.
Yeah.
But anyway, I love Sterling Hayden, and his this crazy gravelly voice, but it definitely seemed like they wanted a more down to earth human playing that role or whatever, and not this gigantic threatening presence.
But they did set up that he was a military man, right? Or at least he knew
for
military
sure.
people.
What I'm saying is that, I mean,
because all the men were at that point. They were all military men.
The 3, I don't know what they were. The presidential hitmen, being paid by some sort of organized crime, or
Johnny, the Section 8.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't call me crazy.
All 3 of them, but particularly Sinatra, the leader of the band, Sterling Hayden could have pounded into the ground with his fist. You know, it's like tent spikes.
And Sinatra was tiny in that movie.
Yeah.
He was like a beanpole.
Right.
But
he, you know, he was pretty good as the scummy, wiry, shifty, you know, Giovanni Ribisi type that he played in that movie. A very sweaty, desperate villain or whatever.
I was totally casting a lot of these movies with, you know, current actors just to see what that would look like. Even if you did it like those shot-for-shot remakes of it. Just interesting. I have no idea who that would be.
Well, what's funny is it suddenly was remade recently in the 2010s. But
that recently?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm you know, I haven't seen it, but you know, I'm not sure how closely it follows the plot. But yeah, I mean, you know, imagine it's like today it would be what, Giovanni Ribisi and Jason Momoa as the sheriff or whatever. Like, you know, it's like again, someone who would just like,
that's pretty good.
You know,
yeah,
like, you know, snap his neck and give him the Sub-Zero finish him.
I liked Suddenly a lot. I thought it was interesting how they actually got some pretty decent graphic violence on screen. Like there was some heavy moments in all these movies. There's especially Manchurian Candidate. But
yeah,
let's go with Suddenly for a minute.
What town is this?
Suddenly.
Suddenly what?
No, that's the name.
It's a funny name for a town.
Uh-huh.
The town of Suddenly hadn't seen anything happen to it in several years. At one point, it was a booming thing that suddenly things would happen all the time. Like that's why it got its name, right? So I'm assuming that would be during the 1800s. It was probably a big booming area, and people were milling through there and making money, and probably the Wild West.
They had this sense that it was a former gold rush town.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
It was the Deadwood of its time, and you know, fast forward to the 50s, and it's this sleepy little burg, and it becomes
Burg. That's what he says too. Burg.
the perfect place.
I'm sheriff of this burg.
What the Hades is going on in this burg? Have you noticed any strangers in town during the past week?
No.
Are you sure?
Sure, I'm sure. I know everybody in this burg. The only strangers we get are tourists.
The perfect place to like have a presidential train stop.
All right.
And you know, because nothing would ever happen there. And then, lo and behold, that's exactly where things happen. And, you know, it's funny, you know, the movie almost felt like it could have been a play. You know,
it was shot very much like a play. Yeah. I mean, especially there's the shot of Sinatra's character, Johnny Barron, was giving his monologue and walks all the way toward camera as he's slowly brought into focus, and it was just like staring directly into you. It was definitely a play, or felt like a one scene or one wall set.
Listen, Sheriff, a man can stand for so much and no more. Why, before the war, I drifted and drifted and ran. Always lost in a great big crowd. I hated that crowd. I used to dream about the crowd once in a while. I used to see all those faces scratching and shoving and biting. And then the mist would clear, and somehow all those faces would be me. All me and all nothing.
So yeah, like most of the action kind of takes place in that, you know, living room. And, you know, it kind of lulls you into thinking it's going to be this kind of melodrama with the way that it sort of slowly unfolds. But man, that the ending just gets like, it's so explosive, and it goes sort of full Tarantino there.
Exactly. The setup of the electrical, the voltage box on the back of the television.
Yeah.
Like that whole setup there, they foreshadowed that earlier. Ooh, popped his finger, you know, ooh.
Ooh, 5,000 volts. Ooh.
Yeah, exactly. That might knock you out of your shoes or something, he says. But I like how the kid calls him out on that.
That was a close call, boy.
How much is 5,000 volts?
Enough.
To kill you?
Well, it'll probably pick you up and toss you across the room. That is, unless you were standing in a puddle of water, and then you'd be grounded. And if you were grounded, it'd kill you deader than a doornail.
Will it hurt?
Like blazes. You stay away from that set now, and stay away from those wall plugs. Don't monkey with electricity unless you know what you're doing.
Why did you, Grandpa?
You got me there, boy.
Good lines from Pops. I like him a lot.
Right. Yeah, no, Pops is a good one. All of that played into how ripe this town and this moment was for something like this to happen, where it was like, because everything's so tranquil and so placid, and everyone is Sterling Hayden was in the military, and Sinatra just served, and Pop Benson was a former Secret Service until he had a heart attack or something. And then, so everyone's little credentials, hey, we need to come in and inspect your house and all this stuff. Like there wasn't this distrust of what that could mean.
In fact, it was very welcoming.
Yeah.
Once the FBI was at the door, come on in,
right?
Make yourselves at home.
Right. And that's part of the thing that like sets this thing in a time and place that feels so different than now, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That level of sort of suspicion and paranoia in these three films kind of like gets cranked up and cranked up and cranked up, sort of as the mid-century sort of Cold War mindset and all of that, starts to take hold on the popular imagination. And but what was great about this one was, it's like it starts off this sort of melodrama. Ellen, I can't remember her name. Helen. Her first husband died in the war, and the sheriff wants to move on the family. And
3 years later, though, he's not really pushing his way in. But I did have a question though, because he was super nice to Pidge when he first sees him walking down the street,
right
after your Opie moment.
Yeah.
And then you find out that Pidge is the kid of the woman he's trying to get with. So I was like, okay, well, now I get why he's being so nice to the kid.
Yeah, he weasel his way in through the kid. Yeah.
But Pidge is cool. He had his moment. I think everyone had their moment in this film. And I'm sure at the time this was considered some extreme action and violence on screen. You've got the sequence that at the end that's just kind of nonstop.
Yeah.
With Pidge grabbing the real gun when they think it's still his cap gun, and him taking a shot, missing unfortunately, but dropping that gun, and then Helen or Ellen gets her shot in, and then so does Todd Shaw. So everyone like laid into Sinatra at the end there.
Right, right.
Especially after his buddy was electrocuted from the foreshadowed electrical box on the back of the television.
Yeah, and man, when that guy went, and he was like compulsively pulling the trigger or whatever,
yeah,
and shaking, and that's firing down the cops, and then they lit him up, and were he was getting both electrocuted and torn to shreds by the bullets from the cops below.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty intense. And it was definitely one of those things where it felt like violence from a different era. It's like it's not just a guy on horseback like shooting someone and they kind of clutch their gut and like keel over. It's like there was this long drawn out moment of, especially the henchman who gets electrocuted.
Yeah.
Long drawn out moment of his death and like the violence and horror of it.
Because it was the full round out of that M1 or whatever he was shooting.
Yeah.
And then they thought that, the people on the FBI on the ground and the state police all thought that they were attacking them or getting attacked. So they're like, fire back.
Yeah.
Fire back. It was like, Jesus. Getting into The Man Who Knew Too Much. Hitchcock's version of violence is going to be a little bit more, I would say, in your face, especially with what he could pull off on screen.
Yeah, so this one too, it had, now I'd say just overall, it feels like your impression of The Man Who Knew Too Much was a lot more sunny and optimistic than, say, Manchurian Candidate, certainly. But
yeah,
and it definitely got into some dark moments, The Man Who Knew Too Much. But like it started off in that same sort of vein of, gee golly gosh, sort of all-American family from Indianapolis, Indiana. Have you heard of it?
Yeah.
And they show up to Marrakesh on a vacation. Again, it's because Jimmy Stewart's visiting places that he had been in the war. And, they get sort of embroiled in a sort of a cloak and dagger, literally dagger.
Mm-hmm.
But, sort of overall, it has, even more so than probably Suddenly, and perhaps it's because it's in color and, who knows. But there's that feeling that, that the movie is taking place in a more, sunny and optimistic outlook on things. But still, it has this interesting feel to it. Like the paranoia starts pretty early for Joe, who is the Doris Day character.
Mm-hmm.
She's at unease by the what was his name, Louis Bernard, who
Bernard is exactly
who they meet on the bus, and then like everything about him, he's evasive with his answers, and
exactly he never. She noticed, and I mean, I was listening to him talk too. Every question that she would ask him, he would dodge.
Right.
But he would ask Dr. McKenna, Jimmy Stewart, anything, and Jimmy Stewart would give him the most long-winded answer, every bit of information, little details of where he was. And she's like, "What are you doing? You just met this guy.
Yeah. You don't give out this information." Yeah, exactly. Now he knows everything about you, and
the
you
way
know
that
nothing
she
about
went
him.
through all the points that he gave up during that conversation, because she was really on it. That I thought that was a brilliant move in the writing of that character.
Yeah, no, that's true. And the movie wants you to believe that okay, Joe's just out of her element. She's a little paranoid. And then, step by step shows that she's right to feel that way. And then, well, I guess the turning point was that basically in the market the next day, they saw police chasing some guy, and then that guy who got chased also got stabbed in the back and wanders up to Jimmy Stewart and whispers at his dying breath about this assassination plot.
And that's what Jimmy Stewart knew too much of.
Exactly, and hence the title. And then he goes down to the police station to give a statement, and in the middle of that gets a phone call saying that his son's going to die if he says anything. So now that starts him down this path of trying to get his son back and not involving the police.
But he doesn't involve anybody. He doesn't even involve his wife at this point. He doesn't let on that her kid has been taken, because I think in his mind he wanted to keep everything chill for the moment until they could get grounded together.
Well, he also wanted to confirm everything, because as he was
right,
calling the hotel, and then he went back to the hotel and tried to find the couple who had
the Draytons,
the Draytons who had taken his son back, and it becomes clearer and clearer that actually this stuff is happening, and this isn't, just paranoid ravings of everyone around him. He's the most skeptical guy, and everything. Like, it turns out that in this case, the paranoia wasn't paranoia; it was actual something to be worried about.
Right.
And then it gets to probably not the most memorable scene, but it's probably the best scene in the movie, which is where he kind of sits Joe down to tell her.
Oh yeah.
And there is this acting style from that time period that still feels a little stagey. This is right around the time that style starts to turn, and like you get the more immersive style that everyone kind of remembers from Marlon Brando. And this moment where Doris Day hears the news, it really feels very, very natural, and unlike some of the other moments that very deliberate, but like a sort of a stagey style. Whereas that moment felt very, very, intimate and raw, and just like, peeled back. And, it's funny, like as I was watching it, I feel like the, some of the Sharon Stone breakdowns in Casino were sort of influenced here. Especially when he was like, "I take a half of one of these, one of these," and like, she's like on the bed.
I love that scene. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, yeah. No, I see that now. Now that you bring that up, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, there was a stark difference between Doris Day. I think Doris Day consistently throughout this film. I thought her acting was incredible. I thought they felt like a real couple.
I mean, yes, that too. And the movie was like The Man Who Knew Too Much, starring Doris Day and everyone else. It's like
she was 100% the star of that film. Yeah. Outshone everyone. Again, when Kay Sarah Sarah played and she started singing, and I literally. Thinking about it now, I know it sounds cliche, but I literally did have goosebumps. I was like, holy crap. Yeah. I just really saw the stark contrast between how her performance in the film, which again was on that turning point of real, raw, emotional acting. And then, while I love the Draytons, don't get me wrong, I loved that couple. I thought that they were brilliant, henchmen. I thought that was exciting. But there was the one moment, Mrs. Drayton, she's with Hank, their son Hank, who they have kidnapped, knowing that Hank's going to be killed. They're going to send in the hitman to take him out because that's how it works, when you try to take out the prime minister of somewhere.
Fake Menistan?
Fake Menistan, exactly. But anyway, she knew that was happening, and she did this move where she kind of looked at him, looked away, looked back, and then she walked over and stood there, and the camera kind of did the push in. I mean, clearly acting for people sitting in an audience.
Yeah.
While Doris Day, especially in that scene when she finds out about Hank, that she was acting for a camera and someone looking right at her and for the person that was with her. So I thought that was interesting. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I mean, that one definitely struck me the first time I saw it, and watching it again the other day, it doesn't lose any steam. It's still it almost feels like it's from another time. I mean, again, kind of like at the end of Suddenly, where it doesn't feel like action from that time or a death from that time. Like this is it's the usual thing to do at this point in time. Would just be you tell the mother that her son's been kidnapped, and she's like, hand to the forehead, faints, right?
Exactly.
And
that's the move.
Yeah. And then this one was definitely a lot closer to what you would imagine that reaction would be like, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, the it's funny, this movie was a remake.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Hitchcock remade his own film. So this movie,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. This movie originally, the Draytons or whatever, one of them was played by Peter Lorre in the 30s. And, it has a very similar end of at Albert Hall and the orchestra, and it's the same song.
With the cymbal crash.
Yeah, exactly.
Which they opened the film with and bookended, or I wouldn't say bookended, but foreshadowed that through the credit sequence.
Right.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So it's really interesting to sort of watch them back to back. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff in the 34 version with Peter Lorre. And in that one, it's this interesting rough draft of what this movie became, which is, sort of, funnier and more suspenseful and just sort of all around better done. Although what I will say is in the 34 version, there's this great shootout at the end that also kind of feels ahead of time. It reminds me a little of, it was probably inspired some of the shootouts in Assault on Precinct 13, where, it's just it starts to become very abstract. Papers are blowing off, windows are breaking, it's
another movie that kind of starts with the idyllic town, the kid and the husband. I'm sorry, I'm going back to Suddenly a little bit with the intro.
Yeah.
That kind of feels like that with the little girl and her dad. They go to get the ice cream, and she gets blown away. Everything goes to shit.
Are you talking about Assault?
Assault, yeah. Outside
I ordered
of the
a twist.
Exactly. And I mean, just horrifying, But again, I mean, it's interesting that you brought that up, and I didn't. So the ending must be different in the 30s version then, because the ending of this one was just so clean and precise.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed the ending of this film. I thought the sequence was beautiful. I thought it was shot beautifully. I love that foreshortening on the gun. You know, the gun that like opens the curtain.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I love when they use the gun to like, you know. But it's obviously they had this little special on the gun, so it's got that little nice flare in there. I mean, it was very classic, you know, Hitchcock or any type of a crime movie. But if there's a shootout at the end, that's going to be a much different tone of an ending. Can we talk about the ending of this version though, real quick?
Yeah, sure.
The very ending.
Oh yeah, the last shot.
The friends that are visiting their flat in London, who have been waiting for them, consistently ordering drinks and just hanging out and partying while they're out saving a prime minister of wherever it has stand. And they come back and Jimmy Stewart's like, "Oh, sorry, we're late. We just had to go pick up Hank."
Yeah.
And then it ends.
The end.
I was like, Hitchcock had a lot of moments in this movie that were hilarious. The wild goose chase he went on to the taxidermy.
Yeah.
He gets his hand caught in the tiger at one point. It was very slapsticky. It kind of came out of nowhere.
Right.
But I think that's interesting how
the other Ambrose Chapel, that thing?
The other Ambrose Chapel. Are you Ambrose Chapel? Yes, I am. He goes, "Do you know why I'm here?" He goes, "Well, I think you need to talk to this guy who also doesn't know why you're here."
Yeah.
But let's get into a big brawl.
It is that sort of like a perfect Hitchcock thing where it's like it's kind of suspenseful. It's kind of a red herring, and you know it's also it turns like comic in a way.
Yeah, absolutely comic. It felt like from a comedy of that era.
Right, exactly. And then you know when you get to the actual Ambrose Chapel, and there's that that really creepy Bernard Herrmann music, just kind of like underscoring it as they're getting
and their
there.
Weird piano player.
Well, this is like before they even get in there, and then they get inside, and then like that the creepiest hymn you've ever heard is what they're playing. And like it was like almost as if they were gonna go out and do the Wicker Man after that.
Exactly. It felt like Midsummer, Wicker Man. We're going to go out. Yeah, we've got a bunch of sticks on the ground in the shape of different pentagrams.
Yeah, if this were a different movie, the McKennas would have been sacrificed to the old gods or whatever.
We've got the one actor who was the hitman in this one, the marksman, actually, that they hired, who was also in Manchurian Candidate.
Yeah.
What a casting job on that guy to find that face.
I kind of forgot about that connection, right? But like, so that guy, his name was Reggie Nalder?
That's correct, yeah.
I totally forgot that he was in Manchurian Candidate. And, but he just has such a distinct face. He's also the Kurt Barlow in Salem's Lot, the 70s version.
Exactly, the master.
False priest.
Right, yeah. Obey your master. Honestly, for a made-for-TV movie, that might be a good one to watch on this one. I know I'm already getting into horror again, but that's a pretty good TV movie.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, that'd be a good one. But yeah, he was
Stephen King in here.
He all he needed was the two front teeth, and a little bit of blue paint. He looked just the part. I mean, the guy was not the best looking, but he had more of a part in Manchurian Candidate. And I mean, if you wanted to say anything else about The Man Who Knew Too Much, we can move on to that movie.
No, that's fine. We can move on. I had totally forgotten that he was a part of that sort of famous scene in the I don't know what it's like the reality of it was the Manchurian what's it called, like operating theater.
Yep.
And it's the they're going to drop a junior mint into the patient from up there, but
exactly,
like he's one of the.
If there isn't a Seinfeld reference in every episode, I'm going to be pissed.
Okay, you can check that one off.
Yeah.
But he was in in the sort of the Communist International Conspiracy. It was almost it was very James Bond. It was very Spectre.
They didn't really go into who the communists were in Manchurian Candidate, but I'm assuming it was Chinese and Russia.
Yeah, exactly. I think those were the biggest representatives.
I gotta say, I'm gonna say this flat out, and I'll ask you obviously the same. But Manchurian Candidate was by far my favorite of these films. It had me on the literal edge of my couch watching it. I couldn't stop. I think visually it's stunning. I think the performances are amazing. I think Angela Lansbury is incredible in this movie.
Oh my God, yeah.
And the fact that she herself was tortured throughout the film, knowing that the assassin that she requested was her son. And so that was how they kept her so close and so manipulative of him.
Right, exactly. That's brilliant. How they would keep her in their pocket and everything. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
who was the Shadow organization? They never really said that, right?
Well, I mean, the whole idea was it was just the sort of the Soviets, the communist, capital T, capital C,
right. And I like that. I think they did that again. And suddenly, as well, there was that invisible partner that hired Johnny Barron, right?
Right. It's funny in the two Sinatra movies, you get to see sort of the motivations of the assassins or the conspirators. They're pretty well outlined. In The Man Who Knew Too Much, sort of the reason they're killing this guy, it's like there's some baron who wants to take his place. It's like it's not super clear, and it's not super important, I guess, either. But they definitely go into him a lot deeper in the Sinatra movies.
So there was a remake of this one with Denzel Washington, right? As I think 40 years after, I think 2002.
Yeah, I think Jonathan Demme
directed it. Yeah, and I read a little bit about that. Now that seeing this, I would like to see that because they updated it to I believe the Persian Gulf War.
Okay, right.
I might be wrong. But that would make sense, right? Because it was 2002, and it's like 10 years after.
Right.
I mean, that sounds about right. Anyway, so I'd like to see that. And I guess Bennett Marco is played by Denzel. So Sinatra's part is Denzel. And Liev Schreiber plays the Raymond Shaw. Character. You haven't seen the remake?
No.
Okay,
I love this movie too much, and I wouldn't. I probably wouldn't want to watch it, but
I mean, so I guess I'll ask you. I mean, do you have a favorite of these three? I mean, we could still talk about the film.
Sure. It's definitely the Manchurian Candidate is it's a classic for a reason, and it totally lives up to that reputation, and
absolutely.
What was so nuts is that this is the third movie that Frankenheimer directed that came out in 1962.
Third movie that came out in the same year that he directed.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what that meant for production, but he had a movie that came out in 1961, 3 movies that came out in 1962, and 2 movies that came out in 1964. I mean, and 2 movies that came out in 1966. So it's like he just had this period. I mean, the 3 in 1962 is just it blows me away, especially
what were the films in 1962?
All Fall Down, which also had Angela Lansbury, and Birdman of Alcatraz, as well as Manchurian Candidate.
Yeah. Wow. What a year.
They are in the Korean War, and that's the first title card. I think it explains that, and then they kind of go up on this hill and they get captured, and then they get taken somewhere. They're all knocked out.
The new title, or the new terminology at the time, was brainwashing. That they were literally just what I think dry cleaning is the what they called it later on in the film too. Don't think of it as brainwashing. It's more like dry cleaning.
His brain has not only been washed, as they say, it has been dry cleaned.
Well, actually, like brainwashing was a term that came out of the Korean War. It's like a literal translation of a Chinese phrase,
right?
Wash brain,
right?
And then, it went from having sort of no instances ever showing up in English to it being totally ubiquitous and everyone knows what it is. Like just overnight. I mean, it became this zeitgeist of a word.
Based on this film?
No, well, based on the Korean
War.
So and essentially what it was is that, American POWs were captured and they confessed to, dropping biological weapons on the North Koreans. And the U.S. Army was like, there's no way we would have done that. They must have been brainwashed. Enter the word brainwash.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah. So that's sort of the atmosphere in which this movie is being made. Again, this is like, cranking up those, Cold War paranoias, exactly. And, the conceit of this movie is that there's this like international and unstoppable communist plot to take over America, right? And the brainwashing is just the tip of the iceberg. Underneath that is the McCarthy-like Johnny Islin and
trying to book all the communists, or the number keeps changing.
Yeah, exactly. How many was that again?
But Angela Lansbury is pulling that puppet strings.
Exactly. And then then she's the puppeteer, but it turns out there are puppeteers above her as well, and so it's it's all pretty interwoven there. But an extremely paranoid idea, right?
Right. Yes. Islin, I thought was brilliant. Every time they had him on camera, he was a little bit more sweaty. And they put a little bit more spray on him every time.
Yeah. And man,
by
how
the
much
end he was drenched.
Did he look like the sort of Vice President Nixon from that time?
Which is interesting because this is
62. So Kennedy is in the White House, but
right.
Nixon was Ike's VP, and then he ran against Kennedy, and it was like that, that supposedly it was like the first televised debate, and it's like Nixon's sweaty upper lip or whatever. Yeah. Like
they put some sort of.
Did him in.
They said there was some product at the product at the time. Yeah, you just put on this. It would cover up your 5 o'clock shadow, and he's like, I don't have time to shave. I'm like, they should have. Yeah, exactly. And I had the Nixon vibes the whole time. Clearly, there was matching visuals with those that probably from the time of any news reporting or any coverage of that. You could feel it,
Yeah. How great was that press conference where
the what one?
The press conference where Sinatra was kind of being the liaison for that Pentagon brass guy, and then the very thinly disguised McCarthy stand-in Johnny Islin stood up. But the camera sort of whips over. We see it playing on the television, and we see Angela Lansbury kind of like hovering over it the whole time, making sure he stays on script.
Right.
Moments like that, like it kind of again is moving out of the very stage play, one room setting, theatrical idea of what suddenly was to more. This is a lot more verite. This is a lot more documentary. There's handheld in it. Obviously there's a lot of things that are very clearly staged, and like the milk pouring out of the carton,
the gunshot.
Yeah, it would just very T2, right? And then
absolutely, that was a great call. I can't believe I didn't even catch that.
But there's a bunch of things like that are very sort of mechanically built and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But there are also interspersed. There are these moments that feel almost documentary, like. It's like
most of the interviews or the times of
direct cinema.
Right.
It's like where the camera is just kind of a fly on the wall, watching without commentary, and that press conference, for a lot of it, while we were sort of seeing the TV, seeing Islin in the background, Lansbury in the foreground, it had that very direct cinema look and feel to it, like very documentary-esque.
Mm-hmm.
Which also, this movie is the sort of starkest of the three, the most foreboding and everything, and part of it is because it's sort of that cold direct cinema style in certain moments. It has that almost documentary feel to it. Despite the fact that there's a lot of stuff. I mean, the garden party scene where it's like the camera turns around 360 and it keeps changing, like who's on stage and who's in the audience, and the only thing that sort of remains the same are the soldiers that are just like bored out of their mind, and they're dead on their feet. It's like, hand me that pistol. Yes, ma'am. Like, shoot little Jimmy through the forehead, please. Like,
what blew me away by that, and I think that's when I texted you the mind-blown emoji watching it, was the fact that all of the soldiers who are under this conditioning, they see Dr. Yen and the rest of the group as a big garden party full of African-American women.
Well, they did once it was from the black soldier's perspective.
Right.
Okay. When he was remembering it, that's how he saw it. And like when
everyone individually
Marco remembered it, he saw it differently.
How did they ever show how Marco saw it?
Yeah, so I think the first time we see it, it's we're in a garden party in New Jersey, and it was pretty much all white women there. But when we see it from the black soldier's perspective, when he wakes up screaming,
right,
from his perspective, it was all sort of black church ladies, and
brilliant.
It had that different perspective on it, which was, you're right. It was really cool. It was very subjective, right?
Absolutely. That's exactly when my head went off the rails. And they also, I mean, we had a strangulation on screen. We saw a man die from strangulation. And then we see little Timmy, or whatever the guy's name that was sitting in the back there, Boyd. What would you say his name was?
He was our mascot.
Yeah, his mascot. He's just really nice looking kid.
Again, like, it sort of takes that archetype of the Opie, that kid from Suddenly, and just blows his head off.
Right, and graphically blows his head off. There's blood everywhere, and that's when
chunks
Sinatra
of brain like splatter against that like painting of Stalin or whatever.
Yeah. Yes.
And it blows the kid across the room as like this chair goes flying. It's like, that was one of those moments where I was like, oh, hello, this is not the movie I thought it was. Like,
not at all. It had a feeling to me of The Prisoner, not knowing exactly where you are throughout the entire piece.
What was so exciting about this is like the, that how everyone had that. What did you think of Raymond Shaw? Raymond Shaw is the kindest, bravest, warmest, most wonderful human being I've ever known in my life.
Right. So what I thought was they were going to use the "What do you think of Raymond Shaw" as the trigger, but it ended up being the Queen of Diamonds, which is actually the title sequence of the film.
Oh, right, yeah.
And it was like those old motion graphics. They probably animated something by hand of the Queen of Diamonds with the credits rolling over it, and I'm like, that's got to be something. I love the use of the loaded deck.
Yeah.
Pick a card, any card. But also, I have a question, because Eugenie, Janet Leigh's character, is she Bennett Barco's operator?
It's funny. Every other time I watched it, I just thought it was a sort of rushed love story, like meet cute type thing. But this time watching it, it was like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, maybe this isn't either such a easy coincidence where, extremely disturbed and sweaty Frank Sinatra like knocks over a table, has trouble lighting cigarettes, and they drop in his drink, and he just goes out and stands in between two cars, and he's out there just like, sweating and smoking and like, a total wreck. And it's maybe not just that she's falling head over heels for this complete shell of a man. Like, and maybe there's a more paranoid reason why she's with him. And I had that thought watching it this time that I had just sort of like glossed over the past couple of times, because it maybe love stories in that era, they skip some details, and
because they end up together. They
And it's like, well, maybe it's just old Blue Eyes is too irresistible, even if he's like completely falling apart.
PTSD.
Yeah. And she's like leaving her fiance to be with this guy, and like
right,
all this stuff.
I didn't say I was married.
Right. Right. But watching it this time, it sort of struck me that, hey, maybe there's something else here. Now it's obviously it's never explained, but she's seems to have constant vigil over him. So
yes,
a handler. Or
don't they play solitaire? Isn't there a moment where they are playing solitaire?
Yes, because that's where he sort of explains the forced deck thing.
Well, but I thought that was a different. Maybe I'm
well,
just confusing
and then he does
moments.
the forced deck for Raymond.
Mm-hmm, right, they actually
to
play
try and break him out of it.
I liked how every time he'd see another Queen of Diamonds, it was like he was breaking more of those bonds, as he called it, or those ties.
Those
He's
links.
Like, they're links, yeah. They're breaking your links.
The links, the beautifully conditioned links are smashed.
We're breaking your links. I thought that was great, and it was a nice visual for me to put that into perspective.
Yeah, it's funny. Everybody's great in this. Obviously Angela Lansbury steals the show in a lot of ways, but man, how great was Lawrence Harvey in this, and just how just heartbreaking and tragic was his story.
Oh my God.
Just like it's like he was preconditioned for brainwashing with his the horrible mental strain he was under with his mother for his whole life, and her control over him, and
before she had absolute control over him.
Yeah, exactly. Before sort of the, what is it called, the beautifully constructed links. Even before that, like there was a different type of psychological hold she had.
Right.
And you take that, you take his sort of like loveless, desperate, empty life, and they
said that flat out. He was loveless, right? Or,
yeah, and he's like, I know I'm not lovable, and all that kind of stuff. But you take all of that, and then you have the other senator. What was his name? Thomas Jordan.
Yes, exactly. So Jocelyn was Senator Thomas Jordan's daughter, who was, in love with Raymond.
Yeah, exactly. And
they were in love with each other.
You saw these like brief glimpses of before he went off to the war, what their life could have been like. After they got married, for that brief amount of time, that there was these two little pockets of story where it's like, oh look, he's happy, and he can get away from his mother, and he can have
this dark life.
Yeah, and then it just all comes crashing down with this, and this tragic form, and all of that. It's you go from this guy who it kind of makes your skin crawl because he's just so cold and remote, to peeling back those layers and finding out about how sort of tragic his situation was, and then to where it ends up going in the end, where he kills Senator Thomas Jordan. He's like, "What's that in your hand, boy?" That's
right.
A pistol,
so like
sir.
under that influence of, at this time it was Angela Lansbury, his operator.
Yeah.
I think we've found out now that his mother is the operator at that time in the story too.
Yes.
She sent, because then she needs to explain to him that she was tied to him because he is her son. Whoever she's working with, this communist group, keeps her in their back pocket just based on the fact that she's this guy's mother, and she has to send this robot out to go kill people, assassinate people. And the fact that he kills Senator Thomas and without any hesitation kills Jocelyn, and doesn't even know it until much later when he's visited by Ben Marco.
Right.
And that's when we do the whole loaded deck solitaire, and he breaks those links, right?
No, exactly. And then in between sort of the major set piece assassinations, it is when Angela Lansbury, what was her name? Eleanor? She had that really bone-chilling speech.
That's the one.
It's like, during this part of the candidate's speech, when he says X, Y, and Z, you're going to shoot him. And then
repeat after me.
Iceland, Johnny will lift him up, and we've crafted this speech for 10 years, the most rousing speech I've ever heard. And like, that whole thing. And then, her other secondary speech to him about how the handlers, made him the assassin and like ruined his mind, and, how she's going to get revenge. It was very Shakespearean.
Very much so.
It was just like mesmerizing, like watching Angela Lansbury in that.
There were moments that they even the most evil person had to be somewhat humanized. It did bother her that her son was who she needed to work with, but it still didn't get in the way of her finishing what she needed to start and finish.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting that they kind of humanized her as a mother there in that scene, even though she was still a killer. But in The Man Who Knew Too Much, we had the Draytons, and Mrs. Drayton was not happy knowing that little Hank was going to have to die, and she really showed some emotion there. And so I thought those were two similar plot beats in those two films. Those stuck out
true.
to me.
Like they, unlike maybe Suddenly, where there's not much to the Frank Sinatra character. He's just crazy and loves to kill.
Yeah, he won a Silver Star for being a fucking nut, apparently.
Right. In this one, they had some really interesting and complicated, or in both Man Who Knew Too Much and Manchurian Candidate, they had these, you're right, they had another layer to both the emotions and the motivations of the main villains.
Mm-hmm.
But then we get to sort of the climax at that convention, and he's supposed to take out the nominee, and he takes out Johnny and his mother instead.
Graphic kill again.
Graphic kill. Man,
yeah,
how
forehead shot.
How just like jaw-dropping was Angela Lansbury's death. Like the way her like knees buckle and she
blew
just like
out
falls
of the chair,
down.
basically.
Yeah, it's
unbelievable.
Like, again, it wasn't the sort of like cowboy gut clenching and like
no,
like falling
not
over.
This movie. This movie was a director trying to get real with violence, I think, but also be very stylized at the same time. It had, in my opinion, a black and white manga or graphic novel feel, especially when the little with Opie gets shot in the the Raisinette or the Junior Mint area.
Yeah.
It's funny they were calling it the Junior Mint area. Anyway, but when he gets shot, like there was that big spurt of blood, it reminded me kind of Tarantino. It's just like too much.
Yeah.
Like it might not be like that, but the hole through the head, the forehead from Senator Iceland, I literally was, I made a noise like out loud, like, oh my God, And then when Lansbury gets it, and then when he shoots himself, I was like, I guess that's the only way that this character's arc can end.
You couldn't have stopped them. The army couldn't have stopped them. So I had to.
I mean, he had one last fight in him, right, to get past that conditioning, to destroy his operator and to destroy Iceland, who was, he's the puppet behind the whole thing, but Lansbury, who was the mastermind behind it, right, or at least that conduit. I wonder what happened to Dr. Yen Lo. Do we know what happened to Dr.? Did I miss that scene?
No, they kind of never go back to him after a certain point.
Yeah, maybe Dr. Yen Lo's grandson can.
China is here, Mr. Patton.
Oh my God! If we can get, why can't I think of his name? If we could get him to play Dr. Yen Lo, and he's got to be 80 now, right? If not, I hope he's not dead. I'd feel very insensitive. James
Hong.
Something.
James Hong.
James Hong. Yeah. Let's see how old James Hong is. He's got the same fucking birthday as me.
Aw.
February 22nd, 1929.
Look at that.
Same year and everything.
1929. So you're up there.
I'm looking good, right?
Yeah.
I shaved.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Got rid of the quarantine beard.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but then the movie kind of has this little epilogue in the rain, and
kind of,
and it leaves it on a very like despairing note, obviously.
Yeah.
And it's funny, like, to imagine the Janet Leigh character as a handler, or potentially a figment of his imagination in the sense that, like the garden party, like maybe it is the Dr. Yen Lo or whomever.
Oh shit, that one just blew my mind. Again, I think I love discussing that part because this movie is well versed in subtext, and you could go with any direction you want, way off the page or way off the screen.
No, totally. I love this programming of these three movies. Or even if you did a double feature of Suddenly and Manchurian Candidate, like seeing the sort of arc of that Cold War mindset and like the creeping paranoia and the amount of unease with which you're sort of left. Like think of like how Suddenly starts with Mayberry, and then this one ends with hell, and like it's such a contrast.
Cut to black, the end.
Yeah.
Really hard stop. I felt like The Man Who Knew Too Much. I think all these films had trouble ending, literally ending. Like how they found that stopping point, the fade out or the cut to black, whatever they chose. But it was interesting to see how, like that Man Who Knew Too Much, that last funny button comes out of nowhere. Manchurian Candidate, hell, and it's just kind of the end.
Well, I mean, it also sort of reflects the time because
right.
Manchurian Candidate, okay, it was 13 months before Kennedy was assassinated, but it came out in the middle of the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Like its release date was in the middle of that, right? But because a year later Kennedy was assassinated, both this movie and Suddenly were sort of like nary to be found for a while. It wasn't until I think later in like the 80s that the Manchurian Candidate had a sort of re-release, and like that's when sort of most people saw it. And then Suddenly, because it had been pulled from circulation, it didn't get its copyright renewed and it slipped into the public domain. But both those movies had an initial run at the time, and then because of the sort of their similarities to the Kennedy assassination, and Kennedy was an associate and or friends with Sinatra, the movies weren't exactly in demand to be watched, and I supposedly Suddenly got shelved, maybe at the behest of Sinatra, because of that.
Yeah, it was based. Yeah. Presidential assassination.
Yeah. But
there were moments in Suddenly I thought were really brilliant, mostly from Hayden Sterling. The speech going over each individual assassination of each of the presidents, and how whoever did it or whoever assassinated those presidents, none of them made it out.
Oh, like are you talking about in Suddenly when they're going through all the? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, like, I thought that was
no one ever made
really
it out
great.
except for me.
Yeah.
You're a very careful man.
That's right.
Planned on everything, huh?
Sheriff, the first man they shoot to the moon in a rocket will take pains, too. Of course, that's never been done before. Neither has this.
Doesn't that worry you?
Haven't got time to worry. I just make my plans and carry them out.
That's what John Wilkes Booth thought, too.
Booth? Ha! I'm no actor, busting my leg on a stage so I can yell down with the tyrants. If Booth wasn't such a ham, he might have made it. He got pretty far at that, though.
The guy who killed Garfield didn't make it either.
Him? He didn't plan anything. Just took a lucky shot, strictly left-handed, just like McKinley.
And Zangara got the cheer for his try at Roosevelt.
He had to try it in a crowd. I hate crowds.
So nobody ever made it.
I thought that was fantastic. The Man Who Knew Too Much, I have to recap with Josephine McKenna's character, Doris Day.
Yeah.
I thought she definitely stole the show. She was the hero, in my opinion. She had the whole movie figured out from the get-go. And I thought that for the time, and you said 56 this came out, for the time that must have been shocking to see a female really take the lead in a film like that. And I really applaud that movie for that. And then The Manchurian Candidate, I thought Angela Lansbury, in in the best possible way frightened me.
Yeah.
As an actress or as a character.
Yeah.
I was scared of her, and I was scared of the power that she had over this man, her son. I thought, and at the same time, she was such a calculated and cold snake in that film, and such a puppeteer that I think that frightened me the most out of all the villains in these films. And I still do believe that Janet Leigh, Eugenie, I do believe that she is an operator. I do believe that she is attached to Marco, to Frank Sinatra's character. And I think that story extends beyond the end screen. And then I think it goes into that these guys are never going to be safe. They're always going to be part of this program, this conditioned program. And no matter what they do or what anyone does, these links will always exist, and they're going to be imprisoned and shackled by these links.
Yeah, that's a good point. Obviously, a lot of this was to set up this coup so that Iceland could become the puppeted president.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that all the rest of the guys in that squad, they still have, or there's a possibility there that they still have the, the conditioning.
Right, and there were a lot of them, right? And there were a lot of them that we didn't account for in this story alone. So I think seeing that big group of men that were all, part of this, or their whole platoon was taken, right?
Mm-hmm.
So their whole group was turned into these conditioned robots, for lack of a better term. So this story could extend in so many directions.
Here's what I want to see. I want to see the continued story of Henry Silva. One thing we didn't talk about was the Sinatra knocks on Raymond's door. Henry Silva opens, and then it just turns into the fucking trash can fight from They Live. And it's
awesome fight.
What was he doing with his hands? What was he doing with his hands?
What was Raymond doing with his hands?
Exactly.
God, it just goes on and on and on. And he's like, stomping the guy's ribs or whatever.
Exactly.
God.
Because
that
was
fight
when he was
so
trying to
nuts,
figure
too.
out that he was doing this, right?
Yeah.
He was dealing out solitaire.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then, obviously, we as the audience knew that he was he was a plant or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so funny that Sinatra just opens the door and it's nothing but just ass kicking from the time they meet.
It was a long fight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's
it was a long fight.
Another fight with a 3-act structure, and it's like.
But there were some moments though that you could see the stunt double in a headlock at one point, and even had a different haircut than Sinatra.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. We should wrap up.
Yeah. So when thinking about sort of programming a double or triple feature, the idea of wanting to find some sort of connection between the movies, it's usually easy to find two, right? In this case, it's two Frank Sinatra presidential candidate assassination movies. And then, the tough one was, finding that third. And The Man Who Knew Too Much has these thematic links, obviously the assassination part. It also is sort of a nice bridge for that growing, Cold War paranoia, that anybody you meet can just be a part of this conspiracy, this faceless and vast, omnipresent, and much more powerful than we are conspiracy that could change world events. And that mindset, I feel really coalesces in the third one here, the Manchurian Candidate, and it sort of ends on a very bleak perspective, but there is a sort of humor and joy throughout the movie that later movies, sort of post JFK, if you look at Parallax View or something like that, where it is sort of grim start to finish, and it has an even sort of creepier perspective, simply because I'm sure it was also sort of a lived experience, whereas, with Manchurian Candidate, this is, it was more of a hypothetical at the time. It's like,
right. But it was only a hypothetical until less than a year later.
Yeah. Well, just over a year. It was basically October to next November. So it's 13 months essentially. The movie came out, October 24, and Kennedy was November 22 of the next year. But yeah, it then sort of in retrospect, these movies take on this other tone where, because we know what's around the corner, seeing how, an event like this would be imagined to be done 13 months before versus, 9 years before in the case of Suddenly.
Did this inspire that? Did this inspire the whole, the actual process of setting up on a hill and getting a high-powered rifle with a large scope there from a distance to take out a moving, well, at that time, or at least a caravan of cars.
Right.
So it had that similar vibe. That was obviously a moving target, but it felt real.
Yeah.
And then the train didn't stop at the end of Suddenly, so that was kind of had that same feeling.
Because there's so many unknowns and loose ends obviously in the JFK thing, assassination. It's like the ripeness for conspiracy. And if you wanted to look at these movies through that lens, there are a lot of those connections, right? Like you were just pointing out. But then, you could also, if you wanted to go nuts, is like talk about how, Sinatra's connection to the Kennedys, Sinatra's connection to like Sam Giancana, like the mob, and, how that, supposedly figured into the JFK assassination with the Bay of Pigs, and how the mob was sort of involved there, and like the idea of that brainwashing came out of this event in the Korean War, where soldiers were confessing to things that, according to the Defense Department, didn't happen, and the idea that in the sort of late 40s, I believe, the CIA then started to go after their own version of brainwashing. God, what was it called? Operation Bluebird, right? 1949, which, and that's where sort of MK Ultra came out of and all that. Like going down that path, it's like the Jolly and West and sort of LSD mind control experiments that supposedly were being conducted there. And it's like the vast conspiracy within our own borders or whatever about like non-consenting mind control experiments and everything. So all of those sort of ripe and paranoid and conspiracy-minded ideas, you could still find connections within some of these movies just because some of that stuff is still so open-ended. And, when watching it, because you get this sense of the faceless, puppeteers, pulling the strings that we mere mortals can only see snatches and glimpses of, it gives you this sense of just overwhelming paranoia, and that there are all these forces at work sort of weighing down on you or whatever. You get this sense of like, not having a level ground to stand on. It's constantly shifting, and you don't know what's real and what's up and what's down. Are we at a garden party? Are we in the, Junior Mint Medical Theater in Manchuria? And all of that, leaves you with this sense of unease, and you're left with only one thing to say, which is
Hell.
So I think, the best way to sum up the three in, I guess, 2 words would be paranoia, puppetry.
Yeah, there you go.
I'd say that, like, overall, yeah, I agree. I think between all of these films, we see this a level of paranoia, of unease, of mistrust. Obviously, we've got Johnny Barron, who is done with the government that screwed him over, most likely through a Section 8 from being some sort of psychopath right behind the rifle. We've got Josephine McKenna, Dr. and Mrs. McKenna. Josephine does not trust this newfound friend that just seems to be super friendly with them on their trip to some exotic land in Marrakesh. And then in Manchurian Candidate, I'd say overall everyone had a bit of paranoia, specifically the folks that were trying to control those through this conditioning. I'd say that the most paranoia was seen from Aislinn, from Angela Lansbury's character, because she wouldn't stoop to such great lengths in order to get her agenda situated,
right,
without having that sort of paranoia as a catalyst.
But I mean, from as it turns out, in Manchurian Candidate, a lot of the paranoia, a lot of the mystery, all those things turned out to be true, as opposed to the idea of it being just in your mind. Oh, you're imagining things or whatever, right? It's like, no, it actually it turns out all the paranoia was justified.
Yeah, it turned that paranoia into something tangible. And I thought these were great films to talk about. I really appreciate you introducing me to them.
Yeah.
I think they flow together greatly, and I really would like everyone to watch this. Who's ever listening, please check them out. Check out what we said, what we talked about. Draw your own opinions and conclusions. Comment below. And I think we should end it there on a good note. These were really, really fun to see, and I really appreciate it, Jeremy. So thanks so much.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
We will be back next time. We have no idea what we're watching the next time. We'll figure something else. Might be a double, might be a triple, might be a quadruple feature. Who knows? Yeah, but we're definitely going to be using collections of films based on our own thoughts on how these films might link together. Think of it, like Jeremy said, as a little film festival that we're putting on, and this is our programming. So we'll come up with 2 or 3 more for next week, and we'll see you then. So wherever this is posted, like it, share it, and we'll talk. We'll see you next week.